if we look at the cards side by side, starting with the Fool card, we see that these are very similar, right? The outfits are a little different, same idea. The biggest difference I'm seeing in these cards is how the message is being depicted. So we have here with the Connolly deck, we have the Fool is sort of at a crossroads, kind of trying to see which way to go. Here we sort of have the Fool at the edge of a cliff, sort of unaware of where he's walking, right? And the message is very similar. It's just depicted differently. So this idea of taking a chance, taking a leap of faith, not getting too caught up in the details. And then if we look at the Magician cards, very similar. Pretty much no difference that I'm seeing. And then we look at the High Priestess. Also very similar. You can see that in this one it kind of shows the water in front of the High Priestess, and you have the gates in the back. And you can see the moon and the stars in the back here. And the crown here isn't as noticeable, more like a tiara. And here, again, a bigger crown. You can't really see the water in front of her or any gates in the back. It's kind of just a wall of vegetation, right? You're not really seeing the moon and the stars in the background. The Empress, very similar. Sort of just sitting in this garden-like area. And in both of them you see running water. In this one here, it sort of looks like there's a stream, and in this one there's a fountain of water. You also see that there's a little bit more detail here with the flowers and the vegetation. And in this one, down on the side here, we have a heart with the planet Venus, the symbol for the planet Venus. Here, you notice that she has a heart on her dress. The Empress, again, very similar. In this one, it kind of looks like the Empress is inside, sitting on a throne. And in this one, He's outside sitting on a throne. And you see the ram, the symbol of Aries, depicted in both of them on the thrones. You're seeing the Ankh, Egyptian symbol of life, in both of them. In this one, it's on his staff, and in this one, he's holding a separate Ankh and he's holding his staff. And then you see it looks like he's holding the world in his hand. In this one, it doesn't look so much like the world. Kind of just looks like this yellow ball. In both of them, you do see what appears to look like mountains in the background. And the Hierophant. Again, very similar. You're not seeing a huge difference here. In this one, it does appear to be like men going to see this Hierophant. In this one, it appears to be women. You see the symbol of the keys here. On this one, it's here in this top right corner. And then we see the Lovers. And this is pretty similar. You kind of see this depiction. Very similar to the image that is painted to us of the Garden of Eden. And you see in this picture we have a burning bush on the right hand side, and then we have an apple tree with a snake coiled around it. In this one, we're not really seeing a burning bush. There is a bird here. That we're not really seeing in this one. The angel on the cloud is in both. In this one, we're seeing the angel depicted with red wings. And we see the sun up here almost like a halo. We see this here too. However, this is a red circle versus these rays of sun. Also in this one, we see this big mountain in the background, and in this one, it's more like hills. We also are seeing some water back behind the grass here. And I would say that they are more covered up and more exposed in this one. And then the Chariot. We see sort of a similar depiction. The armor is a bit different. This one is more like a Roman soldier. We're still seeing the depiction of the wings in both. And we're seeing these two Sphinx-like creatures here. Here, all we're really seeing is the heads of the creatures, and they're actually on the chariot, where here it looks almost as if they're pulling the chariot. And in this one, we can see some castles in the background. And we see this cloth over the chariot, very star-like. We're seeing something similar here with this flag. And this one, we see these accumulating clouds in the background. And then the Strength card, again, sort of a similar thing. We're seeing a woman and a lion. In this one, we're seeing them in the grass. We're seeing some hills in the background. And we're seeing this woman in a flowery dress with a tiara made of flowers. We're seeing the infinity symbol above her head. And we're seeing it's almost like she's holding this lion by the jaw. In this one, this woman is sort of just sitting here on this brick wall with this lion standing behind her. Almost looks like she's on a bridge. We're seeing this water with the lily pads and the lilies. We're seeing some jungle-like vegetation in the background. We're seeing the sky and the accumulating clouds, and the infinity symbol still here, right here. And she's sort of in this yellow dress. The Hermit. These are depicted a little bit differently, but the similarities are there as well. And this one we have the Hermit. It looks like he's walking on snow, like snowy mountains. The sky is sort of gray, indicating that it's nighttime. He's in these very dark garments, a hood over his head, holding a lantern and a staff. In this one, we see that the Hermit doesn't look as hidden or as covered. The outfit is a bit lighter. There's no hood. Again, still looks like he's walking on these snowy mountains. There's a little bit of vegetation here. And you can actually see that the imagery is a lot clearer, sort of showing you more of this mountain that he's walking on. And he's holding a staff that is lit on fire, so like a torch. And there's this man reaching out for this torch. So sort of a different image that we're getting. And then the Wheel of Fortune. Here we're seeing this wheel being held up by this diving creature. And we're seeing some more creatures down here in the clouds. And another creature up here. And here, this sort of looks like an angel sitting up in the cloud. And they appear to all be writing or reading in some way, sort of representing fate. And we're seeing this serpent here. We're seeing another one of these Sphinx-like looking creatures holding a sword. And we're seeing all these different symbols and directions referring to the different elements in the different planetary areas. And here we see a similar sort of thing. Here, things seem to look a bit clearer. We do have words written for each direction. And again, we have this diving. Here it looks a bit like a creature. Here we're seeing it more as a man diving under this wheel. And again, up here, it looked as if this Sphinx-like creature holding a sword. Here we're seeing more of what looks like an angel. And then when we look at the four corners, the four directions, we're actually getting these elemental imagery versus what we're getting here with these different creatures. So we're getting the pentacle, the sword, the cup, the wand. So these elemental images. And then for the Justice card, we're seeing a very similar thing here. And here it looks like this person is inside of a castle, sitting on a throne. And we're seeing the balance scales and the sword, of course, for justice. And this outfit that is red and green. And that's about all that we're really seeing with this image. Now, if we go over to this image, we see a lot of the same things. Again, the sword, the balance scales, the red and the green. We're also getting this satch-like imagery here with the blue. We're seeing some vegetation and flowers down at the bottom, some ivory moving up the pillars. And this looks more as if we're outside. We're getting all these different colors, this imagery of the sky. And we're showing the feather, which is related to the balance scales of justice. If we look at ancient Egypt and we look at their beliefs of going into the afterlife, a lot of times there is this imagery of at the end of time, you are being judged. That is a time of justice, a time of of judging where a feather is weighed and you put an object on the scale that is of value to you, and if the object raises up the feather, then you're going to the afterlife. If it's heavier than the feather, then you're going one place. If it's lighter than the feather, then you're going another place. So this is sort of your journey to the afterlife that it's sort of touching upon with this feather. And then we look at the Hanged Man, and we're seeing a very similar type of imagery. We're seeing this man being hung by string on this pole. We're seeing the vegetation hanging. We're seeing the halo around his head. Now in this one, we do have something a little bit different. We have what appears to be an angel on the side of him. We're also seeing a little bit more vegetation here at the bottom. And we're seeing this Celtic-like symbol on his outfit here. Now in this one, the wording of the cards is a little bit different. For the Rider Tarot deck, this card is referred to as the Death card. And for the Connolly Tarot deck, this card is referred to as the Transition card. Now, I actually like the language in the Connolly Tarot deck. A lot of times when you are giving readings and this Death card comes up, people freak out. They're like, does this mean something bad? Is this referring to my death? Now, if you think about the word death, it actually means transition, a transformation, a change, right? We have several deaths in our lives. There's a death of the old negative patterns that you have done. There's a death of all these different things. So the word death actually is referring to some sort of change. If you think about the way that we view death spiritually, we view it as a person leaving this physical plane and moving to a more spiritual plane. So it's not necessarily death as in the end, it's death as in a change, a transformation, a transition. So I actually like the language in this Connolly deck a little bit more. Now, if you look at the imagery, even the imagery in this Connolly deck is a little better, right? You see the imagery in this one and it kind of freaks people out. You're seeing this dead person on the ground. You're seeing people praying out. You're seeing sort of these chaotic waves of water. You're seeing the sun setting in the background. You're seeing this skeleton soldier coming in on a horse, which is actually, this image is actually referring to what some would call the Grim Reaper or the Angel of Death. this is actually the soldier of death that comes in and is responsible for helping someone transition to the other side. And we also get this flag with what appears to be a white flower. And interestingly, the white rose actually is a symbol of death. So we get that imagery. And then the color black being a color of change, a color of power, a color of transformation, a color of protection. So you get that imagery. And even the horse, you're seeing a white horse with what appears to be these red glowing eyes. And we actually relate fire a lot to the underworld, to like the flames of hell. So that's also referring to death. So it's sort of an intense imagery that you're getting from this death card from the Rider Tarot deck. Very kind of bold and blunt. Kind of like this is just death. And again, that's not really the meaning of the card. The card is referring to some sort of transformation, some sort of transition, but it is a very bold, sort of in-your-face type of imagery that it's giving you. This one in the Connolly deck is a little more calm with its approach, and simply the language and the imagery that we're getting. We see this looks like a child holding out a bowl of water. We're seeing this woman holding out her hand. And if you look at the floor underneath, we're getting this checkered pattern. This black and white. Again, the black and white that we're seeing in this same card here referring to death. So the black being the protection, the power, the transformation, and the white being the purity, the innocence. And we're seeing a crown here on the floor as well. Sort of this symbol of power. And we're seeing a castle being held up on an altar, another symbol of power. And we're also seeing these lighthouses in the background. Again, we're seeing the white roses, another symbol of death. And then here we're seeing what almost looks like a portal or a vortex underneath her feet. So that represents a transition or a change or a transformation, right? The portal is an opening to a different sort of like a different dimension, right? A different level of being. So more subtle imagery in the transition card than the death card. The death card is kind of blunt, bold, sort of in your face kind of thing. So I definitely do prefer this transition card over the death card. And then we have the Temperance. And these look very different. We're getting some similarities, but for the most part, very, very different. In this Rider Tarot deck, we're seeing what looks like an angel, these red feathered wings. We're getting these mountains in the background with the sun over top. We're getting what looks like this pathway down the hill. And we get sort of this marsh-like area with this water here that she is putting her feet into. We're getting the vegetation here. This symbol here of this triangle, very important. Right? That is a symbol of balance. If we think about the triangle as having 3 angles and 3 sides, 3 points, and then we think about the Trinity, the power of 3, right? God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. So that is a symbol of balance of the 3. And then we have this circle upon her head. We sort of have this halo in the background. And here we're seeing some differences. Now we still have the white dress representing purity. We have this triangle for balance. We have the circle on the head referring to the third eye, so seeing things clearly, seeing through the illusion. We still have the cups where the water is being equally balanced between the 2 cups, again representing balance, representing the law of transaction, of this idea of giving and receiving, this universal law. We are, instead of wings, we're actually seeing a red cape in the background. And red is actually a color of strength, of power. We're also getting the red depicted in the red